This boy got a pencil stuck in his ear, but what doctors pull out will haunt you. Kindergartner Louis was doodling on the first day of class last semester, but his friend interrupted him and bet him $5 that he wouldn't break his pencil and shove it all the way into his ear. But Louis wasn't one to back down, so he forced the pencil 4 inches into his ear canal. But later that class, Louis felt a strange sensation in his left ear. He began hallucinating heavily and collapsed to the floor. He was rushed to the hospital just barely conscious. Doctors immediately removed the pencil from his ear, but noticed something was wrong. As they took a closer look inside, they could see something moving. Doctors found a live cockroach that had been living in his ear for weeks.
You won't believe what The Simpsons predicted this time. Number 1. In this 1992 episode, Homer gets kicked out of an all-you-can-eat restaurant for eating too much, but he then sued the restaurant for false advertising. Well, you guessed it, in 2017, a man got kicked out of the Golden Corral restaurant for eating 50 pounds of food, but he then sued the restaurant for $2 million. Number 2. In season 20, episode 4, we see Homer trying to vote for Barack Obama, but the machine keeps changing his vote to John McCain. Well, surprise, because in 2012, a machine in Pennsylvania had to be permanently removed because it was changing people's votes from Barack Obama to Mitt Romney.
I just found a real-life body hack, and I want to see if you can do it. So there's this weird muscle in your ear called the tensor tympani. It's a muscle that dampens loud noises and prevents hearing damage. When you contract the muscle, it produces vibrations, so you hear a weird rumbling sound. To find out what it sounds like, yawn really big right now. Did you hear that? That's the sound of your muscle contracting. If you can do that sound on command, it's basically like having invisible earmuffs. Comment if you can do it. This is the worst way you can possibly die. If you lived in ancient Persia and committed a crime, you'd be sentenced to the worst death in all of history. First, you'd be put in a swamp naked, trapped between 2 boats. Your head would be exposed and your hands and feet would be in the water. Then someone would force feed you milk and honey and cover your entire body in it. This would attract flies, rats, wild animals, and especially bees to come feast on your exposed body. But this isn't how you die. It gets so much worse because you're being fed this honey for days at a time. This leads to diarrhea, so they gotta do number 2 inside the boat. After a few days, maggots start growing in it and begin eating the victim, so they'd be eaten alive from the inside.
This man felt an intense itch on his scalp, but you won't believe what the doctor discovered. The story began in 2017 when Aaron Ralston got back home from a trip to Belize. But as soon as he got home, strange things started to happen. He began to sweat profusely, and his scalp would itch like crazy. Aaron tried everything to make the itch go away, but nothing was working. Eventually, he couldn't take it anymore, so he called an ambulance and he was rushed to the hospital. When he got to the hospital, the doctor immediately started examining his scalp, but he could not believe what was living in his head. The doctor discovered 4 giant maggots living underneath his scalp, and when he pulled them out, they were all still alive.
Here's proof that giants once roamed the earth. Archaeologists have been digging up fossils in Asia that look suspiciously human. They don't know how they got there, but scientists think they're a hybrid of humans and some sort of animal. And earlier this year, scuba divers came across a massive kitchen knife in the middle of the Indian Ocean. This picture was taken in Arizona back in 1993, but how exactly did that footprint get there? And these ancient drawings found in Africa pretty much prove giants lived before us.
I promise you will cry by the end of this. There once was a blind girl who hated herself just because she was blind. She hated everyone except her loving boyfriend. She said that if she could see the world, she would marry him. But one day, someone donated her a pair of eyes and she began to see again, including her boyfriend. So her boyfriend asked her, "Now that you can see the world, will you marry me?" But the girl was shocked to find out that her boyfriend was blind too, and she refused to marry him. Her boyfriend walked away in tears and later wrote a letter saying, "Just take care of my eyes, dear. I love you."
This model was put up for sale on the dark web, but it's what happened to her after that will shock you. Chloe Allen was a 20-year-old model living in London who got offered a suspiciously high amount of money for a photo shoot in Italy. But Chloe couldn't resist. She flew to Rome the next day and was having a blast at the high-end photo shoot. But then a man came up behind her and poked her with something sharp before everything went black. When she woke up, her hands were tied behind her head and the room was pitch black. But little did she know she had been put up for sale on the dark web for $300,000. There was hundreds of people in a bidding war for Chloe, and there was nothing she could do. Chloe screamed and begged for her life, explaining that she had a 1-year-old child waiting for her back home. But you won't believe what the kidnappers did next. The kidnappers actually untied Chloe and let her go. Turns out it was her ex-boyfriend who took her, and he was later sent to prison for life.
This dad put a recording device in his daughter's hair, but you won't believe what he caught her teacher saying. Little Emily was just like any other girl in grade 4. She was kind, affectionate, and very well liked by her peers. But every day after school, her father would see her crying and he just knew something wasn't right. He noticed his daughter's personality had changed. She became very emotional and began to lash out at her friends and family. Every day before school, Emily would break down crying and beg her dad to let her stay home from school. But every time her dad would try to ask her what's wrong, she would run away and not say a word to him. Her dad was so frustrated that he decided to take matters into his own hands. He decided he was gonna listen in on his daughter in a very secretive way. He carefully placed a small recording device in his daughter's hair before sending her off to school. When his daughter got home from school that day, he took the recording device out of her hair, and when he plugged it into his computer, he could not believe what he was hearing. Part 2 coming soon. This dad put a recording device in his daughter's hair, but you won't believe what he caught her teacher saying. Part 2. After listening to the recording, her father was absolutely livid. The recording showed her teacher using profanity as well as yelling at the kids in an aggressive tone. Her father continued listening to the recording, and after hearing everything the teacher said, he knew he needed to act immediately. Her father decided to talk to the school board to have the teacher held accountable. But the school board told her father that there was nothing they could do and that they wouldn't hold the teacher accountable for her actions. So her father went online to make a petition in hopes of seeing change in his daughter's school. And within no time, thousands of people supported him and the teacher was eventually fired.
What would happen if the Queen murdered someone? So basically, anytime someone goes on trial in the UK, it's that person versus the crown. In other words, it's the Queen versus you. The problem is the Queen can't prosecute herself. So yeah, the Queen can actually get away with murder, but it gets worse. Legally, no arrest can be made in the Queen's presence without her approving it. So if anyone ever tries to arrest her, she just has to say no. This guy bit himself with a snake every day until something horrific happened. His name is Steve Ludman, and he's turned himself into a real-life science experiment. When he was 17, he made it his mission to mutate his cells through snake venom. One day, he bought a bunch of venomous snakes and began experimenting on himself by injecting the venom into his skin. At first, everything was great, and Steve began feeling almost superhuman. He did this for 4 years until one day he got extremely sick. Steve was rushed to the hospital with a strange illness and was not expected to live. Doctors gave him a 1% chance at survival, but after 3 weeks of no improvement, his girlfriend did something drastic. She snuck into his hospital room and administered him cobra snake venom. But little did she know that would change his life forever. Steve somehow woke up and made a full recovery just hours later. To this day, he's immune to snake venom and cannot feel pain. Here are 4 things you were never meant to see. This is what it looked like when your face formed as an embryo. It may look like an alien, but everyone went through this before their face looked human. Speaking of faces, this lady suffers from Treacher-Collins syndrome. It's a disorder that makes it look like you have no face, and this affects 1 in 50 million people. Ever wonder how pizza looks so good in commercials? Well, it's actually because they use glue instead of cheese to make it look extra delicious. And this is what it looks like when the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean meet. Here's why Michael Jackson is actually still alive. Michael Jackson was reported dead on June 25th, 2009. But in 2018, Drake made a song with him called Don't Matter to Me. Although it was released in 2018, the song was actually recorded in 1983. The problem is Drake wasn't even alive till 1986. MJ was also spotted in the back of his daughter's van in 2016. You can clearly see that it's him in this photo. He also was seen exiting the ambulance that his dead body was supposed to be in when it arrived at the hospital. If you look closely, you can clearly see someone is helping a man exit the ambulance. And there are multiple photos that have been leaked this year of MJ wearing a mask. But why else would he be wearing one if it wasn't for COVID? Comment if you think he's still alive.
This is how your body actually works. Number 1. This is what it looks like when your body is healing.
This boy claimed he turned himself into Spider-Man until doctors discover he wasn't lying. AJ was a 15-year-old boy living in India who was absolutely obsessed with the Avengers. He spent all day and night watching Avengers movies and reading their comics, but none of this was enough for him. He needed more. One day during chemistry class, his teacher mentioned DNA alteration, and AJ got a horrific idea. He immediately ran home and began researching ways that he could turn himself into a mixture between Spider-Man and the Wolverine. First, he bought thermometers and broke them open to access the liquid mercury inside. He then covered himself in this every day in hopes that his body would absorb it and his bones would turn to metal just like Wolverine. After that, he would go out into the forest and let spiders bite him all over in hopes that it would change his DNA. He did this for 4 weeks until one day he collapsed to the floor and was rushed to the hospital. But when doctors took one look at his x-ray, they could not believe their eyes, like for part 2. This boy claimed he turned himself into Spider-Man until doctors discover he wasn't lying. Part 2. Doctors put AJ through a series of tests to find out what was wrong with him. And to their horror, they found out his body had been seriously altered. Turns out all the mercury he had been taking had been successfully absorbed into his body and left deposits inside of his bone tissue, making them harder like the Wolverine. But when doctors took a look under the microscope at his blood, they couldn't believe it. Doctors discovered the spider bites had altered his DNA permanently. He didn't get any powers but grew strange deformities on his body forever.
These TikTokers discovered a suitcase, but when they opened it up, they were horrified by what they found. These 3 teens were using an app called Randonautica, which sends you to random locations in your area. Some people find cool hangout spots, and others find weird things in the forest. However, these teens were led to a suitcase that was hidden underneath a bridge. As they got close to it, they noticed a horrible smell coming from it, so they decided to open it up. But before I tell you what was inside, they found what they thought was a dead body, so they decided to call the police. And when the police arrived, they confirmed that there were dead body parts inside. This man set his wife on fire, but you won't believe what happened to her. The story began in 2016 when Courtney Walden put her 5-year-old daughter Caroline to bed. She then went downstairs to join her husband around a backyard fire to celebrate their 2-year wedding anniversary. But the fire went out, so her husband poured gas on it, and the next thing you know, Courtney caught on fire. Courtney screamed at the top of her lungs before collapsing to the ground. Courtney was rushed to the hospital with 40% of her body covered in burns. But while she was in the hospital recovering, her husband left her with no money and a $1.5 million hospital bill. But thankfully, Courtney raised enough money to buy a small house and pay off some of her hospital bills. And this is her today, happy and healthy.